Good afternoon and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Poland's new president, Karol Nawrocki, has vowed to bring about constitutional change in the country as he pledged a Eurosceptic Poland First agenda after being sworn into office earlier today. Addressing both houses of Polish parliament, the new head of state laid out a vision in which the president drives policy
is sworn in as president of the Republic of Poland. In his inaugural speech, the new head of state delivered a firm message on immigration, the European Union, and judicial reform.
I will therefore be the voice of those who want a sovereign Poland, a Poland that is in the European Union, but a Poland that is not the European Union, but is and will remain Poland.
He pledged to crack down on illegal migration and stake a claim on the country's fiscal policy.
Plan 21 and my program say no to illegal migration, yes to the Polish zloty, and no to the euro. As president of Poland, I will not allow the retirement age for men and women to be raised.
Nawrocki, who was backed by the right-wing opposition Law and Justice Party, secured victory over the centrist Civic Coalition candidate by the narrowest of margins. He vowed to introduce constitutional change.
Recently, the Polish constitution has been violated so regularly that we, as the political class, must begin working on solutions for a new constitution that will be ready for adoption, I hope and believe, in 2030.
His campaign was weighed down by controversy. Nawrocki was accused of acquiring an apartment from an elderly man under questionable terms and allegedly facilitating escort services during his earlier work in hotel security, claims he denies. He also openly admitted to participating in hooligan fights. Nawrocki's approach sets him against the ruling coalition from the off, potentially spelling a rough cohabitation between Poland's president and its government.
Following the swearing-in ceremony of Karol Nawrocki, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk reflected on the new Polish president's inaugural address.
I'd rather these sorts of not entirely genuine words about the need for cooperation had consequences. To make a long story short, this is not the first time I, as Prime Minister, have listened to a presidential speech. And this was also the case with previous presidents. I have heard this sort of speech before, one where you can very much hear a desire to have the competencies that the Prime Minister and government wield in the Polish political system. The Constitution, to which President Nawrocki referred to repeatedly in his speech, is unambiguous on this issue. Therefore, I hope, though I can't be sure, that his at times snide and confrontational tone will not have any real consequences. But if necessary, we will of course stand firm as the guardians of the Constitution.
U.S. presidential envoy Steve Witkoff met with President Putin in Moscow for last-ditch negotiations with Russian leadership ahead of President Trump's sanction deadline on Friday. Details of what was discussed are not yet known, but talks were supposed to focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what concessions, if any, the Kremlin is willing to make to end its war. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Kyiv and has more.
Well, these talks were meant to focus on an opportunity for Russia to present a compromise, of Russia to present what it will do to bring peace one step closer here in Ukraine. It's safe to say that officials in the Ukrainian foreign ministry behind me remained skeptical that any breakthrough in the meeting between Steve Witkoff and President Vladimir Putin of Russia would lead to any concessions. We've heard from the Reuters news agency saying that sources in the Kremlin say Vladimir Putin has no intention of bowing to the pressure of new sanctions from the United States, saying clearly that the Kremlin and Moscow do not expect the sanctions to be particularly painful for their country. So a tone of defiance from Moscow in the face of this threat of new sanctions from President Trump set to come in on Friday. There were reports in Bloomberg that perhaps Russia was considering easing off on attacks on energy infrastructure and on cities like here in Kyiv, but in the last few hours we saw an attack in Zaporizhia, an attack targeting energy infrastructure in Kherson, other attacks targeting gas infrastructure in Odessa. The message from President Zelensky there Very clearly, Vladimir Putin will not come to the negotiating table in good faith and therefore will not want to end this war unless particular pressure is put on him from the United States and Ukraine's Western partners. So the message from Ukraine very clearly, you cannot trust Putin when he comes into these negotiations. Despite that meeting with Steve Witkoff, it appears that for now Russia has not made any concessions. In Kyiv, I'm Alex Kadye for TVP World.
The European Commission has welcomed the appointment of a new economic security chief in Ukraine. The warm words come after almost 2 weeks of browbeating from Brussels regarding the watering down and eventual restoration of two key anti-corruption institutions in the war-torn country. We're joined live by our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins. Good afternoon, Angela. Tell us more about this appointment and how it bolsters Ukraine's bid to join the bloc.
Yes, so news came out today that Alexander Tsavinsky has been appointed to head up the Ukrainian Economic Security Bureau. This appointment comes after weeks of backroom negotiations. What we know about this individual is that he is a former detective and anti-corruption investigator, heading up this institution that investigates economic crimes, which is particularly important as Ukraine weathers another year of Russian aggression. We heard warm words, particularly from the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, who celebrated this news, however reinforced and reiterated that more reforms are required. We heard the European Commission state only 1 week ago that the appointment of this agency was critical for anti-corruption efforts if Ukraine wants to continue on with its bid to join the European Union. This is something that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated he wants ever since Russian invasion. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated earlier this year that she wants Ukraine to join the 20-member state strong family by the end of the decade. And with this appointment, this demonstrates that Ukraine is at least receptive to these anti-corruption messages that are coming out of the Belgian capital. However, we'll have to wait and see what other planned reforms it has up its sleeve.
Angela Skujins reporting live from Brussels. Thanks so much. Belarus is lashing out at pro-democracy events in Warsaw. Officials in Minsk have summoned Poland's charge d'affaires in the country and handed him a formal protest note. Polish envoy Krzysztof Ożanna was called to the Belarusian Foreign Ministry as tensions spike ahead of the Freedom March and the new Belarus conference set to take place in the Polish capital this weekend. Minsk has branded the events as hostile acts backed by Poland and organized by exiled activists. Belarusian authorities say over 200 people who joined Freedom Day rallies in Poland have been charged in absentia, with searches and property seizures underway at their homes. The Freedom March begins Saturday in Piłsudski Square in Warsaw, alongside the new Belarus conference at the University of Warsaw, both tied to the disputed 2020 election that kept Alexander Lukashenko in power. Opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya says the events reaffirmed the Belarusians' continued fight for freedom. Ukraine's volunteer defense force plays a vital part in protecting the country from Russian airstrikes. It is comprised of thousands of men and women who daily swap civvy street clothes for soldiers' fatigues to detect and destroy drones launched by Moscow's forces.
Meet Sofia Horobchenko. By day, she's a university graduate pursuing a master's degree in IT. By night, Sofia's a commander of a drone hunting unit.
It's coming close to Kyiv region, so we hear alert.
If they don't shoot them down, the Shahid drones could hit residential buildings and kill civilians. She never imagined herself in this role.
At the beginning, we were like in shock, all of us, because we didn't realize, or maybe we didn't want to believe that the war will begin in such scale. You can't just sit here and say, I can't influence the situation. That's not right. You can. Everyone can.
Their mission isn't easy. Some of the weapons they use, like these machine guns, are far less accurate than modern air defense systems. The successes of Sofia's unit count.
Commanders congratulate us, and then it's a moment of glory, a little bit a moment of glory.
And those commanders saw commitment and capability in Sofia.
At the beginning, I didn't believe in myself as much, and I thought that no one would put a woman to such a position, because mostly it's men, and they think that they can do more, but in real life, not always.
These volunteers hope for better weapons from supporting countries, but in the meantime, they will keep playing their part to help save lives.
80 years ago today, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb used in war on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, instantly killing around 78,000 people. It marked the start of a new chapter in human conflict, the nuclear age. During Wednesday's commemorations, the mayor of Hiroshima warned world leaders about the continued threat posed by the existence of nuclear weapons.
Silent prayers were held in Japan on Wednesday as the country marks 80 years since the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba attended the ceremony along with officials from around the world and about 55,000 participants from over 120 countries. All observed a minute of silence at 8:15, the exact time when the uranium bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima.
3, 2, 1, fire!
After laying a wreath at the cenopath, the Prime Minister took this moment to send a clear message amid rising global tensions.
We must not repeat the tragedy that was brought upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is our country's responsibility, as the only nation that has suffered atomic bombings, to uphold the 3 non-nuclear principles and lead the global initiative for a world without nuclear weapons.
But experts say the reality is far from that.
There has been a dynamic of its own where the weapons are built for their own sake, for implausible scenarios where it's simply beyond any reasonable number.
World War II ended with Japan's surrender after the dropping of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which took place days apart. The bombs killed more than 200,000 people, some from immediate blast and others from radiation sickness and burns. The legacy of the weapons continues to haunt survivors today.
That was an unspeakable scene. I will never forget what I saw, no matter how much time passes.
My father was badly burnt and blinded by the blast. He couldn't even hold my hand. He placed his hands on my shoulders, but I just couldn't walk with all his weight on me.
In the years after the bombings, survivors, known as hibakusha, often experienced discrimination due to widespread rumors that they carried contagious illnesses or that their children might be affected.
I truly want the world to be peaceful, but there's just too much mass killing going on of ordinary civilians. What's happening in Palestine is really the worst, isn't it?
Although Japan remains the only nation to have endured nuclear attacks and has expressed a commitment to nuclear disarmament, it has not signed or observed the UN treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons.
Global warming isn't just hitting people, it's hitting nature and hard. Australia's Great Barrier Reef has suffered its worst decline in nearly 4 decades as extreme heat waves trigger widespread coral bleaching, raising serious concerns for the reef's future.
The sharp decline was due to the mass coral bleaching event that was driven by the global marine heat wave that actually affected coral reefs all around the world. It started in 2023 in the Caribbean and hit the Great Barrier Reef in February, March 2024. And this bleaching had very serious impacts on the corals, on the living corals of the Great Barrier Reef, and caused a lot of them to die. And so the levels of living coral on the Great Barrier Reef have declined very sharply. On the northern Great Barrier Reef, 25% of last year's coral cover was lost. On the central Great Barrier Reef, the reefs fared a little bit better, with 14% decline in the amount of living coral. And on the southern Great Barrier Reef, we saw the loss of 30% of last year's high coral cover. And so in the northern and southern regions, this is actually the largest decline we've ever seen in 39 years of annual monitoring. 2024 and 2025 is another back-to-back mass coral bleaching event. And this was unheard of previously. So what we're seeing is that these marine heat waves are becoming more and more frequent and more intense. And so what we're concerned about is that even though we've seen that corals can recover, we're not seeing that there's enough time for corals to recover completely.
And that concludes Midday Report for you today. Thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.